Well, welcome everybody. Today we're talking about understanding the PSAT, a roadmap for the SAT and for college admissions. And I'm so happy that you're with me here tonight. I'm your host, Ann Dolin, and for the last 24 years, my tutors, executive function coaches, and test prep tutors, and now college admissions folks have been helping kids to do better in school and to improve their chances for getting selected to the college of their choice. Today, we're talking about something really specific, and it has to do with the PSAT. And it's a good thing because I have an expert in the house, Kristen Landis. So I'm going to introduce her in just one moment. So today, we're going to be talking about the ins and outs of the PSAT and how the score on the PSAT relates to the SAT. We'll talk about the elephant in the room, and that is really the test optional movement and what it means for your child, whether they're, maybe still in middle school or they're in 9th grade, 10th grade, or they're a junior right now. How to help your child stand out, because now it's very, very different than it was even 5 or 10 years ago. And certainly since we filled out our college applications. So I want to introduce you to Kristen. Kristen is a college consultant with us here at Educational Connections. And she has her bachelor's from the University of Richmond, and she's also an attorney. She has a law degree from Emory University. Now, Kristen's experience is definitely twofold. For a number of years, actually for 11 years, she worked at University of Virginia, and she evaluated over 10,000 applications. And these included not just in-state and out-of-state candidates, but also international students. So Kristen, welcome. I'm glad that you're here with us this evening.
Thanks so much for having me tonight, Ann. I appreciate it.
Kristen, you've looked at tons of applications over your time at UVA, and I'm so glad you're with us now, helping our students with their applications. And so from seeing it from that side of the table and to helping kids now, what have been some trends that you've seen in the last few years? How has admissions changed?
Well, I think the biggest thing about admissions that have changed, I know we're going to talk about this like throughout the evening, is the test optional world that came about because of the pandemic has made it so that students cast a much larger, wider net. Schools that they may not have applied to before because they may have been inhibited because of their SAT or their ACT score, they're now saying, hey, let's give it a shot. And they're going test optional. So the result of that is so many universities are seeing a large uptick in applications. So it's just becoming that much more competitive. So this year, I'm just right in the throes of it, as you are too, Ann, right now with our seniors who are applying to schools. And it's a really exciting time, but I'm really happy to be here this evening with you because for these younger students, we have the luxury of time and to provide them with valuable information to help kind of prime them and set the stage and make it the most optimal environment for them to apply when they're in their fall of their senior year, like we are right now with so many of our students.
Thank you, Kristen. So let's talk a little bit about the PSAT and why it's important. So what is it? Well, it's kind of like a practice SAT, and it's given to students depending on the school you're at in 9th, 10th, and 11th grade. Some schools give it all 3 years. Some schools, it's just the junior year. But really the purpose is practice, and the scores are not reported to colleges. This is really for your information, for you as parents, for your child, to get a sense of what is testing like and how do my scores measure up and what does this mean for the future. Now, getting a good score, and Kristen, I'd love for you to touch on this in a second, what is a good score on the PSAT? But if you have a top score, and it is very hard to get in this group, you are in the running for a National Merit Scholarship. And this is very prestigious. And if you get this type of scholarship, colleges look at it very favorably. What did you see as an admissions counselor, Kristen, at UVA when students received the National Merit Scholarship or even were a qualifier?
Sure. I mean, and just as you alluded to, it is really highly selective. Only about 50,000 students in the entire country even get the overture, the offer to apply to be a National Merit semifinalist. And from that, about 10,000 students go from there. And then to the finalist is even is even more selective. I have, in my 11 years, I didn't see that many finalists. I did see a number of semifinalists, and it is a really wonderful award. And it's students, I recommend that they highlight it. I have a number of students right now that I'm working with highlighted in their application under their honors program. And then they go through a process where they have to apply to be a finalist. So it is quite illustrious. But as you said, the purpose of the PSAT is really practice for the majority of students. It's a wonderful opportunity to kind of get your feet wet.
Yes, for sure. And so whether your student is in 9th, 10th, or 11th grade right now, and if they're going to take the test, you'll see it come around on October 12th. And then you'll see scores back early December 5th and 6th, scores are being released. And that's a long time to wait. It's different when kids, however, take the SAT. The waiting time is about 2 weeks, but it is definitely longer for the PSAT. All right, so let's talk about changes, because if you have a child taking it this year, they're going to take it with the traditional paper and pencil version, where they get a test booklet and they have a Scantron sheet and they fill in the bubbles just like they have for many years. But that is going to change soon. And the College Board, which actually produces the PSAT, the SAT, and all the AP exams, they are changing up how they deliver these tests. And in the fall, so a year from now, the PSAT is going to be digital. I'll talk about what that looks like in just a moment. And in the spring of 2023, spring of next year, there are just a handful of AP courses that are also going to be given digitally. And then in the spring of 2024, so a little less than 2 years from now, the SAT is going to be digital, and that is really a huge change. So what's going to be the same and what's going to be different? When it comes to the SAT, the scale will still be the same. You have 800 for evidence-based reading and writing and 800 for math, and that's a combined perfect score of 1600. It will still be proctored at your school. So it's not going to be like kids are sitting in their bed taking their SAT on their laptop. It won't be like that. They still have to go to a school. They can use their own laptop, but if they don't have one, they will be issued one. There will be accommodations, just like kids get accommodations now. So if your child has a 504 or an IEP and they get perhaps extended time, they'll still get those same accommodations. And the subject matter will also be the same. There's still the traditional reading, there's still the traditional math. But there are changes. First, as I mentioned, it is all digital, meaning that everything's online. And it's shorter, which I think is great for kids. Instead of it being an endurance match, which it is right now of 3 hours, it's 2 hours. And part of that is because there are short and long reading passages now. In the new test, the passages are going to be much shorter, and that makes the test overall shorter. In math, there is going to be, right now, there is a calculator section and a no calculator section. And the no calculator section, to be honest, freaks kids out. They don't like it because they're just so used to automatically going to their calculator. But in the new version, kids will be able to use their calculator on the whole math section. And it's going to actually be a lot more secure. You have heard probably of cheating scandals here or there, mostly internationally, but now each child will have their own unique test. So it's not like now when they go to take a test, it's the same test. Every test will be different. And what I also love is that it will be offered more frequently, which I think is great. So in general, now the SAT is offered most months. In the future, it will be much more often, and kids will get their scores in just a few days instead of weeks. So those are the differences that we can expect in the future. That is the direction the PSAT is going. They're going to be the first one to launch the digital version, followed by AP exams, and then the SAT. Now, We're here tonight to talk about the PSAT. So let's discuss the format. This is what it looks like. It's a little bit shorter than the SAT. So it comes in at 2 hours and 45 minutes. And as I mentioned, the top score on the SAT is 1600, but on the PSAT, it's only 1520. And part of the reason is that the harder questions that students would see on the SAT, they are taken out so that the content on the PSAT is a little bit easier. It's more age appropriate for students. So in the reading section, the score ranges from 160 for writing your name on the test to a top score of 760, and same in math, 160 to 760. Now, let's talk a little bit about what these scores mean. The PSAT shows how your child would have scored on the SAT that same day. And what I found over the years is that when parents and kids get their PSAT scores back in December, they call us up and they're freaking out. Oh my gosh, this score is so low. How could it be so low? My child has straight A's. What's going on? They must have had a bad day. But it's important to remember that it is scored differently than SAT. So you really can't compare them. And the reason that is the College Board wants you to think, okay, if my child took the real test today, this is what their score will be. But keep in mind, as kids get older, they get more mature, they have more curriculum under their belt, they will naturally get better over time, just because their brains are developing and they're exposed to more content. So it's okay if you feel like your score is a little bit low. Let's look at national averages. The average junior, their PSAT score is 950. And the 90th percentile is 1210 nationwide. Kristen, do you want to talk a little bit about PSAT scores and what they look like and some of the top scores that parents might see?
Sure, absolutely. And so I just want to reemphasize what you said, Ann. How you do on the how your student does on the PSAT is not necessarily indicative of how they're going to do on the SAT. I too, myself as a parent, as I'm sure you too, Ann, when you first got that score of your child, you just were like, holy cow, oh no, they're never going to college. But then you realize that it is a different testing scoring system, and you calm down a little bit. So as Ann said, the 90th percentile right now is a 1210 into a 1520. The top 25% of students is between a 1070 and a 1200. And then the top 50% right now is about a 950 to 1000. If your student is below a 950, I mean, it's still a fine score, but this is the luxury of the PSAT. You have time. You have time to take test preps, to prepare, to take practice tests, and to take the SAT numerous times. So not to get stressed, but it is good to kind of understand where you are and where you want your student to be.
Thanks for that, Kristen. Sometimes parents will ask us, should my child prepare for the PSAT? And I personally don't think it hurts to look at the test, beforehand, take a look at the test, know what to expect, especially if you have an anxious child and they're really worried about it. And you can go online, you can get a test book, you can look on the College Board website to see what the format is like. But in general, kids don't really need to prepare for the PSAT unless they're in running for one of the prestigious awards that Kristen mentioned, a National Merit Scholarship. Then kids will get preparation, and that's before their junior year. But in general, because the score isn't reported to anybody else, most students don't get prep. Sometimes they do just because they want to be comfortable and see what the best score is that they can get. But unlike the SAT and ACT, where the vast majority of students are preparing, it's not entirely necessary for the PSAT. So let's look at that PSAT and look at what the breakdown is going to look like. You're going to get a ton of information from the College Board, which I love. It's super helpful. And when you get your score report, you're going to see data represented all different ways. So this is the first thing you're going to see. You're going to see, okay, if my child got a 960, my student is at the 51st percentile. And then they're going to break it down further. All right, my evidence-based reading and writing score is a 430 and a math score is a 530. And right below that, you can see where you're coming in terms of percentile. So this student, for example, is probably a much stronger math student in school, and that's reflected in test scores. And, definitely a weaker student in reading and writing. So you'll get more information, you'll get sub-scores. For example, in evidence-based reading and writing, you're going to see things like command of evidence, words in context, expression of ideas. And that is just telling you where your child falls based on specific content. And it's helpful because as parents, you can see, oh, that makes sense. My child is having difficulty in class with aspects of comprehension, and you may often see that reflected in test scores. But again, this is just more information, the red, the yellow, and the green for you to understand. So you can look at this on the left more holistically and see red means, okay, I need to work on this. This may be problematic. Yellow is it's probably a concern, and green means I'm doing okay. There's also a skills insight report, and this is helpful as well because it tells you, all right, your child can do these things well, but your child may need to focus on these things. They might be able to improve in these areas going forward. Again, just more information for you. And then lastly, there's question level feedback. So they'll show you how your child answered each question and whether they got it wrong or right, and the level of difficulty. Was it easy? Was it medium? And was it hard? And so then you can see, my child's missing some basic easy questions. It may be that they need more remediation. When we see this in students, say in math, for example, and parents call for a PSAT tutor, although we can certainly help them with that, when we see issues with easy questions, or we see the red, yellow, green report and the students struggling in certain areas, we often recommend a tutor may be a better way to go because you want to shore up those weaknesses in content so that they can actually do better later on the SAT or the ACT, or just in general in school, especially in AP or IB classes. So that's all the information you're going to see from the College Board. And that brings us to what happens next. So you get this report. What do you do with it? Well, certainly it is for your information, but ultimately it's going to guide you to determining what comes next with testing, perhaps the following year. Should your child take the SAT, the ACT, which we will also talk about in a second, it's a completely different test, or given a test optional environment, should they not take any test at all? And I love this comic. I think it's so funny. We were originally thinking the SAT, but then Noah's admission advisor told us that left-handed students born on Tuesdays do better on the ACT. And I love this because there are so many myths and misconceptions swirling out there about which test is better for kids, the SAT or the ACT. And the honest truth is, it is a toss-up. Certainly what we've found is about a third of kids do better on one test than the other. But for 2/3 of kids, they score about the same, and it comes down to personal preference. Which test do they feel most comfortable with? So if you're thinking about testing after the PSAT, what are the steps? First, what we recommend, let's say your child's a sophomore right now and they're taking the PSAT, they really don't need to think about the SAT or ACT until the end of their sophomore year. So usually at around that time, we have kids take a practice SAT and a practice ACT. Or it could be the summer after their sophomore year, or it could be the fall of their junior year. And we like kids to take a practice test, one of each, because it provides us with a baseline score. It provides you with a baseline score to see where is my child coming in. It's also good for kids to get a sense of what it's like to sit for a high stakes test. Because next year, if your child's a sophomore, they're still going to have to take the traditional test. And a practice test provides practice with content, with pacing about how much time do I need per question, and stamina, because again, this test is a long 3-hour test. And again, when late in the sophomore year or early in the junior year, we recommend it. Now, that's asking kids to sit for 2 full-length tests. Sometimes parents will come to us and say, I'm really curious about my child's test score and if the score is going to help them when they apply to college. We'll talk about that in a second. That's Kristen's expertise. And they'll say, but they already took a PSAT. She doesn't want to sit for another full-length SAT. Is it okay to take a PSAT and an ACT, and can you compare them that way? And although it's not, apples to apples, it is kind of apples to oranges. We can do it that way and help you make a good decision in terms of the best test for your child. So if your child is a junior now and they're taking a PSAT, I would recommend also at least taking a practice ACT to see if that's a more comfortable test, or perhaps taking a regular SAT practice test. We offer these in the community. They're live proctored, they're online, and you don't pay for the test, but you pay for the live proctor and the scoring analysis. And coming up, we're offering the ACT on November 5th, and we're offering the SAT on October 15th and November 19th. And you can scan this QR code, and that will take you to the schedule with all the upcoming mock test dates. So once we get scores back and we share them with you, this is how your child did on the ACT or and the SAT. We then put those scores into a concordance table, and and this is a commonly accepted table by the College Board and the ACT. It tells us which test your child scored best on, and then we help you make a decision as terms of, should they practice and take a test? The answer is generally yes. But sometimes, depending on their list of schools, they may not use that test to apply to perhaps their reach schools, because, it could be that they don't submit that test score to those schools, but it could help their application for some of their target and their safety schools. So this concordance table helps us to help you determine which test may be best for your child, and then how much preparation they're going to need. So we use the concordance table. As I mentioned, it's usually about a 30-70 split in terms of preference. And every college in the country takes both the SAT and the ACT. And you do not need to take both tests. You can just prepare for and take one. It reduces time and it reduces stress for the student. So which test? I'll talk a little bit about the SAT. And the SAT is similar to the PSAT. So what your child sees on the PSAT is very, very similar, just at a lower level than the SAT. Both tests are considered power tests. And that means there's a good amount of thinking on the test. Sometimes students will say, I wasn't sure what they were asking me. What did they mean by this? So kids have to be thoughtful. On the SAT, as opposed to the ACT, there are actually fewer questions, but they're wordier, and they require critical thinking and analysis. There's a slightly narrower scope of skills on the SAT compared to the ACT. The math isn't quite as hard, but again, the difficulty is in the interpretation and the analysis. And when it comes to the ACT, that test is considered a speed test. You have to go at a really good clip to get everything done in the allotted time. And that's because there are more questions and they're shorter. They're also more straightforward. So that's another reason we encourage kids to take a practice test with the ACT, because for kids that, tend to see things one way instead of looking at the nuances in language, they often like the ACT better. They say it's more like the questions I see in school. slightly broader scope of skills, especially in math. And again, the difficulty is in the pacing or speed. If your child has accommodations, as I mentioned earlier, like extra time because they have a 504 or an IEP, in general, the ACT is a more friendly test because, again, the difficulty is in the speed. And when that's taken away, if your child has extra time, they tend to almost all the time favor the ACT. All right, Kristen. So we're going to talk about the timeline, and then we're going to talk about some of the ins and outs of the PSAT and admissions. So many families ask us, how many times should my child take the test? Well, they should take the PSAT as many times as it's offered. If it's optional, they should sign up and they should take the PSAT. And then when it comes to the ACT or the SAT, this is, I know, a complicated graph, but it shows you all the times kids can take tests. And in general, students take the test twice, sometimes 3 times, but often twice is a good amount of time. And there's been a push more recently for kids to take the test earlier and to take it lots of times. But I don't agree with the take it earlier and take it lots of times approach, because when kids take it too early, they don't have enough curriculum under their belt. They're not as mature. They haven't had enough time to practice. Statistically speaking, students score their best in the spring of their junior year. So they can take it in the fall, but also leave open a window of time to take it again in the spring of the junior year. We recommend that kids choose 2 dates to take the test, not just one. And the reason we like 2 dates is because now you have a strategy. You might take the test, let's say you're going to go for the ACT, you might take the ACT in February and then in April. In February, you prep. You take the test, you get your score, you look to see where you can improve more, where your weakest area is, and you prepare for those weaker areas, and then you take it again in April. And that's a good strategy. So now you have a plan instead of taking it once and not knowing what to do. You need to have a plan before you pick your first date. So again, take it twice, maybe 3 times, and don't forget your highest scores are in the spring of your junior year. All right, so if we can help you with test preparation, with a diagnostic test, with an assessment of your test, even if you've taken it somewhere else, we're happy to help you, or to create a program specifically for your child, and how sessions are structured, talk to you a little bit about how students perform their best, how prep programs are structured to help kids improve their scores the most. We're happy to do that. And you can scan this QR code and it will bring you to our calendar. And from there, you can schedule a 20-minute call and we can walk you through all of these issues. And if you already have your test, we can provide you streamlined feedback on how you've done. So if you get the PSAT scores back and you want to just talk to somebody about them, you're not sure if they're good or not, we're happy to walk you through those PSAT score results, how that will look for the SAT, and where your child might need to improve or what they can do between the PSAT and maybe the SAT or the ACT coming up. All right, so Kristen, we've talked a lot about the PSAT, the SAT, and the ACT, but now things are a lot different.
Yes.
Let's talk about the test optional movement and what that means for families.
Sure.
And I want to start out with the changing landscape. You mentioned in the beginning that things have changed because of COVID. Can you delve a little bit more into that?
Sure, absolutely.
So yes, the landscape has changed. As we talked about before, the buzzword is this test optional world. So with the pandemic and the difficulties that many people found in being able to take the access to get to the tests, most universities went to a test optional landscape to kind of make it a level playing field during what was a unprecedented time for all of us. So in that 2020, 2021 timeframe, when we were kind of in the height of the pandemic, 89% of the colleges that use the Common App. The Common App is used predominantly by colleges. It's the standard application that students fill out to apply to schools. 89% of those went to test optional. The following year, in 2021, 2022, it decreased a little to 75% of the top 200 schools were still test optional. This year, about 63% are still test optional. So what does that look like for the future? Yes, we're still seeing a decline, but we still already now a little over 8% of those schools have said that they are going to continue it for one more year. The majority of them have not made a decision yet. And then you have some schools like Harvard who say that we're going to stay test optional through 2026. So what does that mean? Exactly what you said. And the operative word is changing landscape. We're not really clear where things are going to go. I think colleges don't even know where they're going to go. We're seeing almost a polar opposite trend going on, the two extremes. Right now, there are a couple of really big universities that have gone what's called test blind. The entire University of California state system, both the UC schools and the Cal State schools, are no longer going to look at testing. They may bring in some AP and TOEFL, which is kind of the English language proficiency test that international students take, but they will no longer factor in standardized testing, SAT, ACT, into their admissions decisions. So you've got that at one end. Then you have other schools like Georgetown, Carnegie Mellon, UNC Chapel Hill, the Florida state system, who have gone back to requiring testing. So we've got we're kind of operating in a dual world right now. So what does that mean? I think that means that we in order to just be as prepared as possible, we prepare for the tests, because we just don't know. We don't know what schools your student may be interested in, and we don't know which way some schools are going to go. So it's better to prepare. And then there's another little caveat, which I don't want to get into too deeply tonight, which is something that schools are doing, whether they super score, which is where they take the top scores of no matter how many sittings your student has, and they meld those together, and that makes their score. Or they say, we want the test scores for every time you took the test. So it's very, very important that when your student decides what schools they're going to apply to, that you look to see what their testing policy is. Are they test optional? Are they requiring tests? If they're requiring tests, how are they requiring the tests? Are they letting you super score, or are they requiring you to submit every single one of the times that you've taken the test? So it's very school specific. So it's very important that you look at that. The other thing that's super important, and this you talked about before, Ann, you alluded to it. When we work with students, once they've got their list, we look at what their score is, and depending on where they apply, we look to see what the admissions rates are for those schools and where their score falls into it. So right now I'm working with students and we're looking at each one of their schools. If their score is in the top 75% or higher, in some schools I err even a little higher than that, then we submit the score. If it's not, then we don't submit the score. Because I can tell you, Ann, there are multiple times in the last 3 years when I was working at UVA, I would open an application and see a student, they would look great on paper, and then they would have submitted their score. And their score wasn't necessarily competitive, but now they've submitted it. So now I have to factor it into the equation of the decision of whether they're going to be admitted or not. If they had not submitted their score, then there would be no harm, no foul. I wouldn't be factoring that in. On the converse side, if a student submits a score and it's a really high score, well, that's great. That also, that factors into the decision as, a plus, a feather in their hat. So that's a lot to unpack, but I've tried to just kind of lay the landscape for you, but that's why it's so important. We're here to help you kind of navigate through this really kind of uncertain time we are in right now with testing.
I was listening to a podcast the other day on testing, and somebody mentioned that the Common App is reporting that students are way far more strategic than they were just a couple of years ago. And the number of strategic test submissions has exploded. So before, when you took a test, you kind of just like, I remember when my older son, actually both of my kids, one's 20 and one's 24, they submitted their scores to all of their schools. But just in a few years, how that's changed, they submitted to all their schools. So now I would never recommend that. You
Right.
have to be strategic and you have to say, well, I'm going to send it to this school, but not that school.
Right.
And as you mentioned, you have to really weigh it. One question that parents often ask is, how do you get that information?
So it's really very accessible. There are tons of college search engines that will those dreaded scattergrams, if you haven't seen them yet. I'm constantly telling my students, please stop looking at the scattergrams, but it shows kind of where the GPAs and the testing scores, the admittance rates for various schools. So it's very easily accessible, just a little bit of research and you can find out that information. The one question that I think I get asked more than any other by students is, if I don't submit my score, is that going to be held against me? And I can honestly tell you, from my position in the admissions office at UVA, if a student did not submit a score, I never for a second thought about, oh, did they not submit their score because they did poorly? It would not be ethical if they check the box that they're not submitting their score, that I would be sitting there making that a ding against them on their application because they didn't submit a score. So that's kind of my answer. That is a question that's asked all the time. So it wouldn't be right for universities to think otherwise.
Thank you, Kristen.
Mm-hmm.
But as you mentioned, on the other hand, if they submit a strong score, that can definitely help.
Absolutely. Yes, very much so.
So let's talk a little bit about the pros and cons of submitting. Can you talk a little bit about another data point for schools? Why is that important?
So, I mean, there's three factors that go into college decisions. One is your courses, your program, the rigor of your program. The second is your grades. And the third is your human insight component. And then there's, so there's really four. And then there's testing if you submit testing. So the pros to submitting scores, if you do well, is it's just an added benchmark, an added component that the evaluator has to look at you. And if you do well, it's a definite positive. And then for the con side of it, it's just one less thing that they have to evaluate. So more emphasis is put on those other components that I said, your program rigor, your grades, and then the other things, which I call the human insight component of your application, which is your activities, your teacher and counselor recommendations, and your essays.
So Kristen, we know that part of this is driven by the number of applications schools are seeing. Can you talk a little bit about, the increase in applications, especially top tier schools are seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. I started at UVA in 2010. And at that point in time, we had roughly about 24,000 applications. I finished my last season with UVA this past March in 2022, and it was a record 51,000 applications. So that is just, it's astronomical. And a lot of schools, I think we have a slide also that talks about tech, a lot of schools are seeing just an exponentially higher volume of applications. And the reason for that is what we started the program tonight with, is that with that test optional world, people are casting a wider net. I think another factor is with the pandemic, colleges got very good at marketing themselves virtually, providing virtual tours, really great marketing websites. And I think people also felt more comfortable applying to schools that they may not visit. I think back when we went to college, you always visited a school before you applied to it. Now, I think people are much more comfortable in a virtual world and they're applying to schools that they may not see. And then, when they get into the school, then they'll go see it. So I think that's why you're seeing a real uptick in applications.
Kristen, you mentioned Virginia Tech, so it's not just UVA, but there's so many other schools, and it's not even just the flagship schools like William and Mary, UVA, Virginia Tech. Also in our area, Virginia, JMU, Christopher Newport, they're all experiencing a flood of applications.
Yeah, they really are. I mean, in one of our previous webinars this past summer, we really delved into a little bit. We looked at colleges in all different parts of the country, and they were all seeing just much larger upticks. Private, small liberal arts schools, larger state schools from other states like Auburn, Middlebury, obviously the high competitive Ivies, but truly almost across the board, most universities are seeing an uptick.
So that brings us to, how can you help your child stand out? When you work with kids, and we're so glad that you're on our team, this is something you do so well. How do you help kids stand out, especially when maybe they think they're kind of average? I mean, that's what I find so beneficial about this work, is taking a student who thinks that they, I'm just average, I don't really have that much to offer. And I'm like, that's absolutely not the case. You are unique. You have a unique voice. You have unique insights and perspectives. And that's what we have to delve and find and elevate and highlight in your application. So what I talked about before was the components of the application: program rigor, grades, and then also your human insight component. And that all crafts your narrative. When we use this term a lot at EC Tutoring, crafting your narrative. And what that means is what sets you apart from the person next to you, what makes you tick, what's your unique voice. And whenever I evaluated applications at UVA, every single component of the application, I'm asking myself, what can this student bring to my university, both in and out of the classroom? And what can my university provide this student with personal and academic growth? And those are the constant questions that I'm looking for answers for. So we at EC Tutoring help you craft that narrative. And that's seen through, here's an example, through even your courses. Let's say your student is interested in, they love animals. And they think they may want to go pre-vet, or maybe they just love animals. And they do, so we sit with them, we look at courses. There are some animal science courses, electives. Electives are a wonderful area where you can kind of help craft that narrative. And then in the summer, they went and they volunteered at the SPCA, or they took a pre-veterinary class at a local university. Those are things that just show the student has an interest and a passion, and that's kind of helps craft your narrative. And you can literally take that in any different discipline. You could go think about robotics or STEM, or maybe somebody loves to cook, or they're a musician or an artist. And a lot of times students say, well, I don't have anything like that. I'm not. And so that's where we sit down and we say, listen, if you had an extra hour, what would you do with that time? Or what have you always really wanted to do? And the great thing about these younger students is that's time where we can explore. This is the time they should explore. I mean, I'm in my 50s and I still don't know what I want to do all the time. So, this is the time that you can try different things and develop interests and passions. And that's what we're here to do, especially with that, when the 9th and 10th and even 11th graders, being able to help craft that narrative that we elevate in the senior year in the application. Thank you for that, Kristen. So crafting the narrative is so important when it wasn't so important just a few years ago. But of vital importance is compiling the college list. Can you tell us a little bit about how to craft a proper list, not one that we're seeing a lot when kids first come to us, that's super top heavy, right, with lots of reach schools.
Lots of reaches.
How do you help kids craft a balanced list?
Yeah, so I mean, I think one of the questions that we get asked all the time are, what's my chances that I can get into fill in the blank, whatever school that is? And the thing about college admissions is it's not an exact science. If we could answer that question every time, we could all retire. But what we can do is we can look at what your grades, your program, what you have to offer, and we can look at schools, and we're looking for two different things. We want schools that will match your child, which means their GPA, their testing, if they submit that, those kind of quantitative benchmarks that we can look at. But really more important to me than anything is the fit. Your student is going to be spending 4 years at this place. You are making a significant investment in your child, and we want to find a school that fits your child. So what does that mean? It means, what do they like to do in their free time? What's their non-negotiables? I want to be in an urban environment. I want to be in a rural setting. I want to have the ability to have cultural events or attend sporting events, or I really love research. Those are all the things that we explore. And I have a list of questions I go through with students to kind of delve in what do they envision their college experience like? And that's where we meld the two, the match and the fit. And we bring those together and we do exactly, I'm sure people have heard these words a lot. I like to call them most likelies. Sometimes people call them safeties. And then you have kind of target schools and you have reach schools. And we try to make a balanced list. We have some safeties, the majority targets, and then some reaches. And that's what's called a balanced list. And that's what we help craft students compile and put together.
Thanks, Kristen.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you will work with younger students, and I'm sure a lot of parents on here, because this is a PSAT webinar, have children that are a little bit younger, maybe 8th, 9th, or 10th graders. Tell us a little bit about how you help kids in those early years and what you do.
Sure. I mean, I love working with students, these younger students, because this is really where we can delve into and help craft that narrative and get that plan in place. And you talked at the beginning of the evening about a plan for testing. There's a plan for college admissions. And this gives us the luxury of time to be able to do that. Time to spend with children doing that exploration that we talked about, finding what they're interested in, helping them find opportunities both in and out of the classroom. Also, if a student is, and this is heartbreaking to me, when I was working at UVA, you would see a student who would do really, really well in STEM classes, but because they didn't start early enough with the math that they would need to get through BC calculus if they wanted to be an engineer. I mean, that's kind of heartbreaking. Early on, we can help do that sequential course structure that they need, specifically in math and in foreign language, in those, and in science in some areas. So not only helping them find electives that they're interested in and exploring those interests, but also getting that rigor that they need for those areas of study that they want to go into. So course mapping is a big thing that we spend a lot of time on. And then we talked about the summer. The summer is a fantastic opportunity to explore, to take advantage of things. And then also do some of that test prep that we talked about. Take the ACT, take the SAT, kind of figure out what you want. With 9th and 10th graders, I like to meet monthly until we kind of get until somewhere in the junior year. And then we start meeting more frequently and start preparing for those college applications.
That's great, Kristen. Thank you so
Mhm.
much.
Sure.
And speaking of college applications, if we can help you, we'd love to be of service. As Kristen mentioned, we have specific programs for students in 8th, 9th, and 10th. We have programs for juniors. And then right now, we have seniors that are in the throes of things. And if your child is a senior and they still need help, we have a Senior Express program where we move them through everything quickly so they can apply by early action or early decision, November 1st or November 15th, or by regular decision in January. And you can get more on our college counseling, either to work with Kristen or Elisa or David on our website, and that's ectutoring.com/college-counseling. And Erin Ebert is amazing. She's been with us for 12 years and she knows this stuff inside and out. She is the main point of contact, and she's the person who will be talking with you about your needs, whether your child's in 8th grade or 12th grade. She will be the person you speak to and can help guide you through the journey. So Kristen, thank you so much for being with me tonight and sharing your expertise. It was such a pleasure having you. I'd love to go to Q&A, and I'm going to have Kristen probably answer most of the questions for the next 10 minutes or so. And then when we wrap up, there will be a survey at the end. And if you would be so kind as to complete the survey, we would really appreciate it. That helps us to know what you liked and what we can do for next time. All right, so Kristen, let me go to the chat and read some of these questions. So one parent asked, what's more important, a high GPA score or high GPA or a high PSAT score?
A high GPA trumps pretty much. Good grades trumps almost everything. So it doesn't matter, like if you have 30 activities or any of those kinds of things, you have to do well. That is truly the most important thing for students to concentrate on their studies. And that's one of the reasons we like to start with students so early, is because, you know, life happens and they get busy and there's a lot of schoolwork and a lot of things they want to do. So when we have the luxury of time to kind of make a plan and prepare, it's so much better than if we're, you know, now even we have seniors coming to us at this point asking for help, which we help them, but it's pretty much crunch time. So grades, long-winded way of saying grades are the most important for sure.
A parent asks, why would a student take PSAT their freshman or sophomore year if the school offers it?
Well, I think you answered that earlier, Ann. I mean, the more practice, the better. The more students feel comfortable with these type of exams, it's an invaluable experience, and it's no harm, no foul. Whether they do well or not, it doesn't matter in their, you know, 9th, 10th grade. It's really getting used to them because they are stressful. And so getting used to that format is really important.
Rosario asks, how many times should the student take the test? If they don't do well the first time out, how many more times should they take the test? And will the schools be given an average, or what will the submissions look like? Well,
I mean, I agree with you, Ann, that I think 2 times is optimal. I think once you get, you know, 3 times, maybe max, once you get past that, the likelihood that you're going to do much better it just decreases. And also it's very stressful for students. It's a lot. So I think you prepare well for the first one. I would take a prep class, take practice tests, take it once, and then take it another time. And unless you're absolutely adamant about it, I think 2 is good, 3 maybe tops. And then with regards to averages, we talked about that earlier. It really depends on the school. Some schools will super score, which is called taking the top of each of the sections. Some will require all of your testing. So it just depends on the school.
Heather asked, should students take Algebra 2 before they sit for their first SAT or ACT?
I would say in a perfect world, yes, the Algebra 2 is on the exam. I think, Ann, you're more of an expert on that than I am, but I would say if you can have Algebra 2 under your belt, it's very important because it's on the exam. And then Heather also asked about the baseline. So I think what she means, her son is a junior in Algebra 2. And the answer is the purpose of the baseline is really to see which test is best for your student, the SAT or the ACT, and then to go in that direction. So if he's just in Algebra 2 now, I think it's still okay to take practice tests, because that helps us understand which tests, you know, they're not just do better on, but most comfortable. What I found is that comfort factor is hugely important, and kids will come out of a test saying, oh my gosh, even if they do a little bit better on one than the other, but they're more comfortable on the other, they'll still prep and take that other exam because that's just where they feel better. So I think your son, without having taken all of Algebra 2, can still get a sense of that. Let's see, would you recommend a freshman start practicing the reading part of an SAT?
I mean, I think there's a balance
between having your kids, you know, pushing them to do things, and then also you have to allow them to be students and enjoy their high school experience. As I said, grades are really the most important, and I think testing it's great if you can prepare earlier on, but really, as Ann said, we really ramp up after the sophomore year. They're more, developed cognitively. They have more curriculum under their belt. So I hate to introduce it too soon and then have them get turned off to it. So I think if they're asking for it, sure. But otherwise, I think Ann explained a really good timeline earlier. And, if waiting a little bit may be more advantageous.
I think so too. Waiting a
Yeah.
little bit is probably a good
Yeah.
idea. Wendy says the IEP allows for her student to take tests on paper. Will that be allowed for the SAT and ACT in 2024? I'm not so sure that the College Board has released information on that. Do you know about that?
I do not,
Kristen?
I don't know
Okay.
what they've decided with regards to accommodations.
And that might be best found, Wendy, on the College Board's website. They have a whole section on the digital changes to the SAT. Laura asks, Kristen, can you provide perspective on early decision?
Mhm.
Are reach schools even viable anymore?
Absolutely.
We spent a good amount of time at a webinar earlier this summer talking about early decision. I am a huge proponent of early decision. If your student has a school that's their school, they want to go there, that's their dream school. If you just even look, do a little bit of research and see the percentages of acceptance rates of early decision versus early action or regular decision, it is a numbers game. They are usually, depending on the school, they can be exponentially higher. Duke University fills half their class with early decision. That's kind of an extreme. There are other schools, UVA is, this is their third year with early decision. I will make a guess that they will probably accept more in early decision this year, now that they've got a couple of years under their belt. Last year, the difference between early action and early decision was maybe about 7% versus a school like UVA, school like Duke, which was much higher. But just look at some of the schools, look at the percentages, and you'll see that early decision, if that's the way you want to go, because remember, it is binding. You have to go to that school if you are accepted, unless the only way out of early decision is if you do not get a financial aid package that meets your needs. So it is a very, very, important decision, but one that I think can definitely help your chances.
Kristen, two more questions.
Sure.
Katrin asks, how many years of foreign language are needed? 3?
So I think 3 is kind of
The baseline minimum for selective schools. I think if you're looking at the highly selective schools, I think if you can get 4, that's great. If you don't go for the 4, I would want to see that you are taking a rigorous course in some other area of interest, that, maybe you are a STEM kid, and so you're taking 2 AP sciences, or you're a history buff, and so you're taking 2 APs in the social sciences, something to make up for that, not that 4th year foreign language.
Thank you, Kristen. And last question, and this is one I've heard from lots of parents over the years. What looks better for admission, a 4.0 in regular classes or a 3.0 in AP or honors courses?
we get this question
all the time. And I have to say that, and it may not be an answer that the parent wants to hear, but like, your child better than anyone else. Your child should take the most rigorous classes that they can, in which they feel that they will do the best. If they are, if an AP class is just too much, then they should take honors, or they should take standard. I do think that students, sometimes they get pushed too hard, and but if they are of a level where they can handle the rigor of an AP, then definitely take the AP. So really only you and your student, that's a conversation for you to have, maybe with your guidance counselor as well, or if you're working with a college advisor, to determine that. But it is a delicate balance. And I always say at kind of the end of these, when I work with Ann, that truly where your student goes to college is what they make of it. The college experience is what they make of it. It will not define how happy they will be in life. It will not define how successful they will be in life. Is it a big part? Yes. But again, I think you need to put everything kind of in perspective and manage expectations. It's finding the right place for your student, wherever that may be.
I love that, Kristen. That's such a great way to end this evening. Thank you
Thanks.
so much for being my guest tonight. and
Thank you for having
sharing
me.
your wisdom and expertise. And parents, thanks so much for joining us. Please wait for that survey at the end. It was a pleasure being with you this evening. I wish you all the best for the remainder of the school year. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.